I will just share real quick. This is something that I myself learned, I don't know, probably about 12 years ago, that I've used for different things, and still try to use it to some extent. And I would say the number one piece of of wanting to share the gospel or sharing the gospel is the number one piece of sharing the gospel is, do you have the willingness to do so? That's the first step in all of it. And then, are you willing to take that next step in your willingness to be able to share the gospel? So you're here, so it means you have a willingness to do so. So that's the first step in all of this, which is a beautiful thing to have. All right, anybody else want paper copy? You want to? Here's another one. All right, so we're gonna start out with just reading through something to help us understand the larger picture of us, the gospel, and then it'll lead us into something in the framework of what we're going to go through. So the first part, I'm just going to read, and you can kind of go along with it. You might not probably need to take any notes, but it's more so just to kind of help us understand the larger picture. The gospel begins with God, not us. God is not created, eternally existing. Before any individual enters the story, God reigns eternally, having initiated all beginnings. It is crucial to grasp this character, lest we misinterpret the narrative, as the Bible begins, in the beginning, God. It wasn't in the beginning, Bryce, or in the beginning, fill in the blank. It was in the beginning, God. Imagine you are reading a novel. You start with the first chapter where the scene is set, characters are introduced, the story begins to unfold. But what if before the opening the book, you understand that this story is a part of a much larger narrative? The book we're talking is the Bible. The author existed long before the story was written, and the world in which the story takes place was created by the author. This awareness shapes how you read the book. You recognize that story, and it isn't just about the characters on the page. It's about the author's larger purpose, vision, and creativity. Now think of the gospel as that novel. When you open the Bible and read, in the beginning, God. It's like starting the novel knowing the author already existed and has a purpose that predates the story you are about to read. God is not a character who enters the story partway through. He is the eternal author and creator, setting the stage for everything that happens. The story of salvation, the life of Jesus, and the events in the Bible are all part of his grand narrative. If we start by focusing only on ourselves, our needs, our desires, our story, we miss the bigger picture. For instance, we might start out the story of the gospel of, you're a sinner. And that starts the story with that person or me. Does that make sense? And we often can do that. And it's like in this isolated vacuum that we begin the gospel presentation to someone. We miss the bigger picture. The gospel begins with God because he is the origin of all things. The eternal king who reigns before any human story begins. Recognizing this helps us understand our place in the narrative. We are participants in this story, not the other way around. It reminds us that the purpose and meaning of life flow from God's eternal existence and his plan, and not from our own desires or understanding. This perspective shifts how we approach the Bible and our faith. We are not the central characters. God is, right? If you read the Bible like you're the central character, or if you read the Bible like it's just to you, you've missed the point, because you are not the main part of that. It's God, and then how we fit into God and his kingdom. We are not the central characters, God is. We are invited into a story that began long before us and will continue long after us. This understanding keeps us grounded in the truth that our lives and our stories are a part of something much greater, God's eternal and sovereign plan. I took a class one time, and the professor said it was a pet peeve of his, so I'm not saying this is right or wrong. It was a pet peeve of his that when people said, oh, God's got a wonderful plan for your life, he didn't like that. We use that often. He said it's better to say, God has a wonderful plan for the whole world, and you get to be a part of it. That's the way he flipped it. We always say, oh, God's got a plan for your life. Almost like it's like, I'm going to pick myself up, and it's like this individual doing this thing. It's more so, God has a plan for the whole world, and I get to be a part of it. That's the story when it begins with God. So, Let's make this story a little simpler. Someone might get the Bible and say, where do I start? How does this work? How does this story all fit together? Well, really the whole Bible and really the gospel fits into four things: creation, fall, redemption, and restoration. This is the whole Bible right here. When you hold the Bible in your hand, it begins with creation in the garden, and Revelation ends with restoration, which we have not gotten to yet, in a new heaven and a new earth, where God's home is now among his people, and there's no more crying, no more pain, no more sorrow and tears. Those things are gone forever. Now, when you read the Bible, you can keep that in mind. But the other thing about this is, just like we talked this morning about a moral compass and how everybody has one. Now, people can kind of break that moral compass. We see that happen in society. Everybody, I guarantee that you know, has all four of these in their life somehow. And so the sharing the gospel is being able to ask questions and to listen for these things in people's lives. Let's go into this a little bit further. Everybody has a creation story. How did we get here? Throw out some to me of things you think people think of how we got here. Huh? Okay, sure. I'm just here because my mom and dad had me. Yeah. Evolution. I'm an accident, right? Cosmic accident. Sure. Where's some other ones? Any idea? Aliens? Okay. Okay, we know this, hopefully, but I just want to read this for us to help us enter into this. Let's talk about creation. This is where we enter the picture, like Olivia was talking this morning. When God fashioned the world, the pinnacle of his creation was humanity. Genesis 1:26-28, God declared, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish in the sea, and the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. God blessed them and instructed them to be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves. So what does this mean for us? Two main things: our place, our purpose. A creator implies distinction, which gives purpose to our lives. We are here to fulfill the purpose that God gives us, which is a part of that grander narrative. Humanity is designed to contribute to his creation by reflecting the goodness and creativity of God, which we see here. The wisdom and goodness of God assures you of this well-designed plan for our lives, and the world granting us freedom in the knowledge that we are not gods alleviates the pressure from having to write our own story. Understanding the role in the story means recognizing our purposeful creation. So with creation, we can ask the question, how did we get here? But how we got here for the believer implies distinction and purpose in our lives as well. Do you think asking someone a question about their purpose in life can help them lead to this? It's a great question. It's actually a really kind of more like a coaching type question to ask, what's your purpose in life? Allow that be the question that you enter the story, their story in. Let's go to another one. Our place, his image. His image. God doesn't attribute his image and likeness to any other creation. While attributes manifest in nature, mighty rivers, eagle wings, none share the image and likeness of God. Only humans do that. Male and female both created. Distinct yet equal characters in the narrative. In the beginning, the goal of humanity, listen to this, the goal of humanity was to tend the garden, so work was in before the fall. Right, these excuses we had about not going to work this morning, before the fall came, work was already happening. All right, so work is one of the main things that gives us purpose in life, and we can find that. It's a great conversation for the workplace. The goal of humanity was to work, and it said God would come and hang out with them in the cool of the day. That's pretty cool. Imagine if that was the goal of your life, to take care of what God entrusted you with. That's your purpose. And to hang out with God. That's your goal. How complicated have we made life? How complicated have we made things? However, this is where the story takes a turn. We're going to come back to creation here in a minute. Everybody's been impacted. And the question is, what's wrong with this place? What do you think? What do you think people would throw out there and say, what's wrong with this place? Yeah. Well, we're going to get to that in a second. But what's wrong with this place first? Because that's the fall. The fall isn't what's right, but what's wrong is the fall. Everybody has a fall story, because that's how it works in the gospel narrative. The right would become more into like the restoration, redemption piece. Yep. No, I mean the earth, where we live right now. Let me give you an example. Talking to a cashier, they said, this world is absolutely crazy. Not sure what's happening in it. That's a fall right there. They have a craziness to it. What are some other things? Okay, yeah, right, correct. So anything, we're going to see here in a minute, anything because of sin, evil, brokenness, harm, hurt, fill in the blank, go down the list, is all because of the fall. But disease, right? Let me give you another one. Talking to someone, I just don't know why my father had to die. That's a fall right there. Death is a part of the fall. And you now have heard their fall story. They're asking a deep question about the fall. And the question is do we have the willingness to enter that? Now, again, you don't need to enter right back into saying, here, this, and this. You might say, oh, tell me about that. Enter their pain, enter their sorrow. We'll talk about more here in a minute. Let's just talk through the fall real quick. We might know this. Humanity rebels against the Creator by rejecting God's good command. Hang out with God. Tend to the garden. Just don't touch this one. Opting from self-rule and separation from God. The rebellion is sin, infecting every individual and aspect of God's creation, leading to death, suffering, disease, conflict, injustice, pain, toil, rift. We get it. The serpent comes in and says, did God really say? Now, one of the reasons why, you might ask, well, why did God give them a command to do everything but not touch that? Seems kind of harsh. The idea is that God is always based on relationship, and he's asking humanity, do you trust me that I have the best thing for you? Because if he was just saying, do this, do that, because I told you, he's made robots out of society. Relationships are built on trust. And so he's building trust with them, saying, do you trust me that this is the best plan? It's not temptation. It's saying, do you trust? It's based. He's showing that he's based on its relationship. Relationship. All right. Adam and Eve's disobedience results in sin, separating humanity from God. The Bible asserts that all have sinned, falling short of God's standard, and the wages of sin is death. The brokenness we experience reflects the universal sin issue, prompting a recognition for a Savior. So here's the question to ask yourself. How can you listen or ask questions to catch people's fall story? I'm telling you, everybody, and this is the thing I've tried to train myself to do is, not that I always necessarily respond, but I listen to people. I even listen to, I'll say this, right? No excuses. I listen to people as they have conversations in the grocery store. Not like I don't stand there, but as I listen, they might be like, man, life has been so hard lately. I got this going on. I'm not sure why. That's a part of the fall. You need more of these? Right here. That's a part of their fall. So you can ask questions, but I'm telling you, listen. People are going to share their fall stories all the time of what they think is wrong with the world. Yes. Okay. No, your fall story should be that Adam and Eve rebelled against God, which brought sin into the world, which caused all this issue. That as a believer in Christ, it's called the fall. That's the word we use in Christianity, theology. It's called the fall. So the fall, great question. The fall is what's wrong with this place. So for the believer, we know that there's sin in the world because Adam and Eve rebelled against God, and sin enters the picture. But with sin comes death. With sin comes brokenness, comes hurt, harm, injustice, pain, toil, death. Right? As Paul would say, the wages of your sin is death. Physically and eternally. Okay? So what I'm saying is, Yep. Mm-hmm. Correct. They're saying they're not using those words, but they're saying they know something's wrong with this place. Make sense? Ask someone, what's wrong with the world? See what they say. Right? I need to say what's wrong with the world is, back in the garden, God created man and women, these two, Adam and Eve, and they chose to disobey God, bringing sin, brokenness, death into the world. Yes? Oh my goodness, did you read my slide? You read the next slide. You did. You need to enter into the commonplace. Because here's the deal. What we often do is someone might say something. Marty's like, the next slide, let's go. We might say something, and sometimes what we like to do as Christians is we like to argue or tell people how they're wrong. I am not telling you this because I think this is the best thing. I'm telling you this because this is something Paul does. Let's read for this. Okay, Acts 17, 22 through 23, Paul's walking around. He's kind of in the in-between time, and he's debating these philosophers. And when he's debating these philosophers, he begins his debate with a common interest or a common point of view. And he says this: So Paul, standing before the council, addressed them as follows. Men of Athens, I notice that you are very religious in every way. Paul wasn't like, you're fake religious. This isn't the real Jesus you're following. He doesn't start there. It starts in a common place. For as I was walking along, I saw your many shrines, and one of your altars had the inscription on it, to an unknown God. This God whom you worship without knowing is the one I'm telling you about. So for instance, when someone says, you know what? This world's crazy. There's so much bad stuff going on. You need to say, I agree. And say, right? That's where you enter their story. They might have creation all wrong, but you're so focused on, well, if they know that God got him here, enter the story where they are already identifying with that story. Does that make sense? Enter their story there. Let me ask you a question. How many of you, if you're going to be won to something, are going to be won by an argument or a debate to begin with? None of us. So when you listen to people, someone might say, I think we came from apes. You can still find a way to enter that. I agree. I think we came from someplace too. That's where you can enter it in. Tell me more about that. Why do you think that, right? And then you can talk, right? Ask questions. Enter that. Don't say, oh, that's not what it was. Like, I agree. I believe we came from someplace too. Make sense? And then you lead them into that. But part of what this journey is beginning to listen for those things in people's life. And you might say, well, that's hard. I can't do that. And I'll say it's like riding a bike. You got to practice, right? It's not a framework. It's not like a module. It's not like, well, I did this, now I do that. It's practice, and you begin to build it into your life. And so find the common point. So creation, the fall, what's wrong with this world, sin. You can listen for those, all right? Next question kind of fits more in what you were saying, Scott. What would make this place better? So let's go this route. Let's go to the person who, not bashing anybody, I just remember this was the example they gave us. Let's just go to the person who is the environmental person. Obviously, we know in the garden, it says steward, take care of, so I'm not against that, but the fall isn't that there's not enough recycling programs. All right? And the redemption isn't if we only get enough recycling programs, life will be better. Right? So that's the thing. So how everybody thinks, hey, what can we do to make this place better? And a lot of people strive their life. Like I've told somebody one time, I said, hey, you're doing the work of Jesus and you don't even know you're doing it. Because they were trying to they're doing certain things. They had these character and qualities and they weren't a believer and they were trying to make the place better. Everybody has some sort of solution. And that's often what we see. I don't want to go down this trail, but oftentimes we see like in politics or other things, they're trying to figure out these solutions, how to make life better. Or you can go read upon story of these utopian societies that tried to create themselves that all went bad at some point, because there's no such thing as utopia here on earth, but there is redemption in Jesus Christ. So let's read this for a moment and then we'll come back to it. God promises and sends a Redeemer, Jesus Christ, to reconcile fallen humans to the perfect Creator. Jesus walked this earth 2,000 years ago, being truly truly God, truly man, lived a perfect sinless life, died as a substitute for humanity on the cross, resurrected, offering this light, hope for this life, eternal life for believers. Jesus lived the life we couldn't live, and died the death we deserved. For God so loved the world, he gave his only son. Despite our brokenness due to sinful disobedience, Jesus willingly pays the ultimate cost for forgiveness. We are purchased, saved, redeemed. This is good news. So as we talked about a couple weeks ago on our Snow Sunday, the gospel is good news for everything, every aspect of our lives. We often shrink the gospel down to, well, we are sinners, Jesus comes and saves us, and I go to heaven. That's not the gospel. Jesus wants to, and is looking to redeem all things in our life. Is it going to be to perfection? No, but that's the insight in mind that he has for us. That's the goal that he has. So we talked about this. The gospel has saved us from the penalty of sin. The gospel is saving us from the power of sin, which is like we don't have to be given over to that, our hurts or hang-ups, and the gospel will save us from the presence of sin. And if you want to know more about that, we can send you that sermon. So that's a place to enter. Listen for people. Do they have solutions to make this whole world better? And if they do, you can say, I agree, I think we can make this world better too. And the world better is not by starting a program or like ushering all these things in. Well, if we only have more people go to church, this world's better. You might say, oh yeah, right? Or if only we get this right leader in place, the world's better. And Jesus would say, no, I came for the person to transform their life. To transform the person. As Paul's going to talk about next week in Romans, I came to circumcise their heart, to tear away the stone and give them a heart of flesh, to transform their life. Or as Paul says in 2 Corinthians, the old is gone, the new is here. You're a new creation. I've come to restore and change the person, not all these other things. Other things change because believers are there or people are present with that. So listen for people's redemption story. What would make this place better? Jesus is our answer. Can we agree upon that? It's the only thing we have. But you can start with a place where you might not agree with the story of what they're saying would make this place better. Start in the commonplace and then begin to lead them. Again, it's not like we can make the change anyways, right? We're just presenting the gospel, sharing the gospel. Let's go to the last one. Redemption. What solutions have you heard that will make this world better? As in, like, when I say better, I listed it that way. But, like, if only we do this, it's all perfect again. That one might be this one's a little bit harder to hear in people, I would say. Anything that comes to your mind. What makes the world better, perfect again? Could be, right? Just set it up. People kind of have a little bit in that, and there's a little bit of crossover between redemption and I should say restoration. My bad. Should say restoration. Okay. All right. Let's go back to redemption, restoration. All right. What happens at the end? Right. Many attempt to answer this. So let me tell you this one. This is why I say many people attempt to answer the restoration question. Anybody ever seen a zombie apocalypse movie? You can answer freely. We're in the company of sinners. So I'm one for a good zombie movie. How about, you ever seen the show Doomsday Preppers? The person who builds the bunker in their backyard and just stores up things for the next 30 years? Or you might, right? Have you ever heard anybody talk about the apocalypse? Or how about, have you ever heard anybody say, well, the end must be near? That's restoration, essentially. It's leading you towards what's going to happen when this gets to, right? Everybody kind of has this thing. That's why there's been this attempt of apocalypse movies of, right? Even, let's think about the movie, what's the one where, like, all the weather things happen? The day after tomorrow, right? The day after tomorrow. That's potentially, even though it's not restored in a great way, it's still restoration because it's like what happens, like people in their life are pointing towards the end to somehow. So we know this end, right? Full restoration is a future promise. One day God will wipe away every tear from our eyes. And God will give us a new heaven and a new earth where his home is now with his people. And that's the tension we live in. We know that's the reality of the future. Like, we have that story too. Know the end of the world. Like, when someone says, and the moon turned red, the end's near. Or like, they'll be like, oh, these things happen, the end's near. And I'd be like, okay, and then what? Well, we're all just going to burn up and disappear. Okay, like I don't believe that, but in my heart I say that. I don't say it to them because we're trying to find the commonplace. But I'm like, well, I know that even if that did happen, it's not going to, because Jesus says he's coming back for us first. So that's what I can look towards, right? But the other thing about this is, I said everybody has kind of like this end in sight kind of thing. We all have it. We just got to think about it. It's there in people. That's why people try to attempt it in some way. Is that in Ecclesiastes 3:11 it says God has planted eternity in every human heart. So that's why there's apocalypse movies. That's why there's zombie movies. That's why there's doomsday preppers. That's why there's the movie The Day After Tomorrow, thinking what happens kind of like at the end, because eternity is planted in people's hearts. Yeah. Well, I mean, they still have it though, but they might not. They're just suppressing it. She said, what happens to the people who don't want to think about it? I mean, it's still there. They're just choosing to suppress it. I mean, and that might not be the person where you might define it. That's also the place where you have to say, okay, they're closed off here. How can I enter the story another way? Yeah. That's still their story, though. So that's where you enter that story to say, well, I agree that we die, but here's what I believe is greater than that, So that's where you enter their story. I agree, we die, But I had that conversation a couple weeks ago talking about death, and I kind of brought it back to you. I told you I'm right there with you, but I said, well, then how you live your life now is important. Giving your life to Jesus. So when you do die, kind of thinking about death. So it's one of those things. Yeah, people have it there. So here's the deal. This is kind of a different way to think about it. We often don't think about life in that way. So I just asked the question in that last one: how can you enter into eternity with people? Like as they look forward, right, to the end, how can you enter into that with people? I don't know the answer to that, but I just threw it out there. So the main premise of this, John, can you go back to that slide of the fall creation fall? So this is the main premise. Again, this isn't like you're not going to say I left here, I mastered it. You may leave more confused than when you walked in, and I'm fine with that. Because what I want you to do is I want you to wrestle with this and give yourself a challenge to say, this week I'm going to try to listen for people's stories as they tell them. And if you're the kind of person that needs to write stuff down, do it. But all the time, I'll talk to people and I'll catch myself because I started trying to think life through this lens. Creation. We're all here from God. Genesis 1, 2. Humans are the pinnacle of this creation. Genesis 3, the fall. The Old Testament's all about pointing to this redemption of Christ. All these messed up people in the Old Testament because it's pointing to the perfect one. Jesus comes on the scene. He dies. He resurrects, and now we are in this waiting period for him to come back, and when he comes back is the restoration of back to what it was. And so this story is really not as there's a lot in it, but it's not as hard as we often make it either. But it's now listening for other people's stories, and then just trying to get yourself in the practice of entering to that story with them, maybe asking another question, or even say, hey, I agree with you, but here's where I'm at. And just let that, right? Because if we believe that the word of God is alive and active, and if Isaiah says his word goes out without void, it's not just me telling them something. I need to let the Holy Spirit work in the words that I'm going to be using to that person. And that's where God comes in. That's where the power of God at work comes into those things. And so you might leave here and say, well, I don't know the 1, 2, and 3. It's not meant to be that, because life's relationships. So the goal is, your next step is to listen for people's stories, find the common place to enter it, and see where you go from there. What's your question? Yes. Yeah. No, not at all. Yeah. So that's a good way to enter into that eternity story. Yep. Sure. Yeah, we got some work for you to do then. We need some good 25-year-olds. We got some walls to scrub, some other stuff. No, that's great. That's a great way to think about it, and just finding those ways to enter into people's stories. Because again, sometimes maybe this is only me. Sometimes I feel like when I share the gospel with people, it's something that they need and I don't, because I already accepted it, and that's not the way the gospel works. Like, as you go back to that sermon from the snow day, the gospel is for believers as well. It's the good news for all things. Like, I need the gospel. The gospel is sanctification, that I'm set apart from sin. Right? The gospel is the restoration. That's the gospel still. I'm waiting for Jesus to come back. That's the gospel. That's the good news that I have to live. My eyes should be on eternity. I need the gospel just as much as the unbeliever needs the gospel. And so I need to enter their story in such a way that I'm in need as well still. And I have this awe and beauty and majesty that goes along with it, rather than like, here's something I've accomplished. I want you to accomplish that as well. And so being able to enter into people's stories, listening for them. So I know, again, if you have questions, you want to grab coffee, more than welcome to. This is something you have to practice. So you have to, when you practice something, you make time for it. So all I'm asking is, as you go about your day, in the grocery store, hanging out with people that you hang out with people, the first step is just try to start listening for some of these. And I guarantee you, when you begin to listen in this framework, you catch things that people say, and you might kind of have before kind of pushed it off to the side, but in their hearts, these are things that they're saying, that how I got here, what's wrong with the world, what's going to make the world better, and what's going to happen at the end. They're all in people's lives. Partly because what you said, eternity's in our hearts. So we all have this, right? The moral compass we all have. No one can argue that. The unbeliever might not think that, but God has placed that conscience in their life. So they're thinking about these things without even realizing they're thinking about these things, and kind of like it's the great exchange. They exchanged really the truth, and they're settling for something else. I think this is what the answer is. Does that make sense? They all have the gospel in them somewhere, so it's helping to draw that out of them to then present the actual gospel for people. Make sense? All right, let me get 2 more minutes. A couple of you, give me a takeaway that you have from this. Okay, process and flow. That's right, Mike. Enter where they're at. Yep. Sure. Yeah, he said admit your own sin. So again, that kind of goes like what I just said, like you need the gospel, but I don't, right? So it's kind of like, oh, my life's perfect now and yours isn't, so you need this perfection, right? Exactly. Good stuff. Listen for purpose, right? Yep. And I'm telling you, don't just I don't mean just ask somebody a question and then listen. That you need to do that, but it's also just listen to people. As people are talking, just listen. If you're hanging out with coworkers around the coffee table and those two are having a conversation, you're just sitting there, listen to what they're saying. It's because you think you're 25 and anybody else have a takeaway? That's great. That's practice right there. You can say, hey, listen, I already know where this person fits. I got to enter that with them. Because oftentimes what happens is we enter where we think we need to enter, or like, they just need to know this. It's like none of us came, right? They say, statistically speaking, I say they, people who do statistics in the Christian world, they say a person needs to hear parts of the gospel 25 times before they say yes. Yeah. Yep. And Paul gives us that. You can find time and time again where Paul enters common ground. And common ground, we almost feel like it's a little bit kind of, because that's not right. But you start there to where you lead them. And then you see that's Jesus' thing. He'd enter where people were at, and he'd lead them from there, right? All the time. The woman at the well, he started with a conversation in water and led her to that point where she was. You can go story after story of Jesus entering into that place to pull that person from that. You can go read through the Gospels and look at it through that lens. Go read through the book of Acts, read through that lens of meeting people where they're at and leading them from that place, entering into their story, and then bringing the greater story at play. To me, the biggest one, too, is just remembering that, right, I am not the center of the gospel story. God is. God does not have a wonderful plan for anybody's life in here. God has a wonderful plan for the world, and he asks you to be a part of it. That's the wonderful part. That's the wonderful part. That he uses somebody like me to be a part of it. He wants to use someone like you at your workplace, in your neighborhood, with your family, to be a part of it. It's not all, and that should free our shoulders, that it's not all reliant upon me and what I have to do. I just get to be a part of it. And God wants to use me if I'm willing to be a part of that. That's the beauty of it. And honestly, I think that's the part we miss, is that it's real and it's alive, and people are wrestling with these things that we have, and we get to be able to step into those things, and then those are the leaves that we get to pick up and say, I saw this happen this week when I entered into someone's story. And the question is are we willing to do it? We're willing. Take the next step, and here's the deal. It's like anything. How many of you, I'll go back to riding a bike. Does anybody remember trying to ride the bike for the first time? How many of you fell riding your bike? Did you ever get up and do it again? You might walk away and said, I just said the stupidest thing. And either you might have to go back and own it to that person, or you can just chalk it up with saying, I hope God, maybe you really didn't say something stupid, you just felt that way. But that's practice. You just do it. And you do it again. And you do it again. You do it again. And then you get to be a part of God's story. So, encourage you, listen this week, find places to enter people's stories. Then you get to write them on leaves as stories. And hopefully these are part of the people that God brings across your path to share the gospel with.